An enamel plate sat on the oilcloth in a kitchen in Cocke County, Tennessee, with one fork beside it and a tin cup of buttermilk. Verlie Greer had set it the same way for 30 winters after her husband walked out the door of the Newport rail yard and never came home. She was 68 in 1968, and supper for her was a single skillet, a half pan of cornbread, and the kind of dignity that did not require company. Number 23 on this list was what she ate the most often because it cooked itself while she fed the chickens. Number 18 needed only one hen and one pot, and it lasted her 3 days. Number 7 on this list was wild as the ridge behind her house, and she gathered it for free. These 30 dinners were forgotten because the cookbooks moved on, the grocery store killed the smokehouse, and most grandchildren never asked the questions that would have written them down. What survives is the practice itself, the arc to a single chair pulled close to the stove, then the quiet pivot to a kind of cooking that simply scales. Subscribe before we count down. Here are 30 forgotten hillbilly dinners for seniors who eat alone. Number 30. Hoe cake with red-eye gravy. A piece of country ham about the size of a small saucer goes into a hot iron pan. 2 minutes aside is plenty, and the brown bits stuck to the iron are the whole point of the supper. A splash of black coffee deglazes the pan, and that thin red gravy is what gave the dish its name. The hoe cake is just yellow cornmeal, salt, and boiling water patted into a flat round and fried in the leftover ham grease until the edges turn the color of a copper penny. One ham slice, one hoe cake, one plate. That was supper in Madison County, North Carolina, on a Tuesday in November, and the woman eating it did not feel poor. She felt fed. The dish has lived in the mountain repertoire since the early 1800s, and a single portion costs about $1.50 at any country butcher. Number 29. Cornbread crumbled in a glass of buttermilk. A wedge of yesterday's skillet cornbread broken into a tall glass, cold buttermilk poured over the top, and a spoon. That is the whole meal. In the hill country of East Tennessee, a working farm widow named it her summer supper because the stove never had to come back on. The sour bite of the buttermilk and the sweet crumb of the bread made a balance that has no equivalent in any modern grocery store. The dish kept Appalachian families fed through August heat for 2 centuries. Ronnie Lundy gave it its own page in her cookbook on the foods of the Southern Mountains. It is dignified, fast, and costs less than a quarter when buttermilk is on sale. Number 28. Fried apples and a single pork chop. 1 thin bone-in chop, 2 firm tart apples cored and sliced into half moons, a spoon of bacon grease, and a pinch of dark brown sugar. The chop fries first in the heavy pan, comes out to rest on the plate, and the apples go into the same pan with the drippings still warm. 8 minutes. They soften, brown at the edges, and turn the color of an October hillside. The chop goes back beside them. A serving for one fits on a saucer. Joseph Dabney documented this exact pairing in his book on Appalachian foodways, and Ronnie Lundy called it the most honest pork dish in the mountains. The apples were usually limber twigs or wine saps from the back orchard, varieties most grocery stores stopped carrying after the 1970s. It tastes like a cool morning on a wood porch. Number 27. Soup beans and skillet cornbread. A cup of dry pinto beans soaked overnight, then simmered all day with a chunk of smoked ham hock, an onion, and water that just covers them. By supper time, the broth has thickened on its own and turned the color of a strong tea. A wedge of cornbread crumbled in is the only addition. The dish scales down without effort. 1 cup of dry beans yields 4 single suppers, and the pot reheats better on the second day than the first. Sidney Saylor Farr put it at the center of her 1983 book on mountain cooking, and Loyal Jones wrote that the smell of the pot was what a hill country grandmother smelled like on a Saturday evening. For a senior eating alone in a hill country kitchen, no other dinner returns this much warmth for so few coins. Number 26. Sawmill gravy on 1 split biscuit. A spoon of bacon grease in a small skillet. A spoon of flour stirred in until it smells like toast. Then a half cup of cold milk whisked slow over low heat. Salt, plenty of black pepper, and nothing else. The gravy thickens in about 4 minutes and turns the color of unbleached linen. A biscuit split open underneath, the gravy ladled over, and supper is on the plate. Mill workers in Sevier County, Tennessee, ate this with whatever the day had left over, and the gravy got its name from the sawdust-looking flour gravy that flowed at the lumber camps. For one person at home, the recipe halves cleanly. The biscuit can be from a tube on a tired evening. No one in the holler ever held that against anyone. Number 25. Killed lettuce over a hot-baked potato. A bowl of leaf lettuce, sliced green onions, and a little salt. Hot bacon grease with a splash of cider vinegar gets poured directly over the leaves, and they wilt down in seconds. The whole bowl tips onto a split-baked potato. 1 potato, 1 handful of lettuce, 2 strips of bacon broken in. The Foxfire books recorded this as a spring supper across the Blue Ridge and the Smokies, gathered from hill country grandmothers in Rabun County and Macon County in the early 70s. It is sharp, hot, and finished in the time it takes the potato to come out of the oven. A solo plate sets up in 5 minutes flat, and the lettuce can be from a kitchen window planter through most of the year. Number 24. Hot water cornbread, cornmeal, and a pinch of salt in a tin bowl, boiling water poured over, stirred until it just holds together as a thick paste. Patted into 3 small cakes and fried in hot bacon grease until the edges are lace. Kratos Williams, the Appalachian scholar from Watauga County, wrote that hot water cornbread was the first supper a child learned to make, and the last one an old widow stopped making. There is no egg, no buttermilk, no leavening, and the recipe survived 2 centuries of mountain winters because it works with whatever is left in the cornmeal sack. 3 cakes feed 1 person well, with 2 left over for breakfast, cold and crumbled into coffee. The dish has lived in the mountains since before the railroads came, and it has not changed its shape since. Number 23 on this list is leather breeches beans. Green beans threaded on cotton string with a sewing needle, hung from a rafter in the back room in late August, and dried for 6 weeks until they rattle when the wind moves through the house. The whole place smelled like cured hay for the first week. By Christmas, a handful went into a pot with water, a pinch of salt, and a thumb of side meat, and they swelled back to something close to their summer selves. The flavor is concentrated, smoky, almost like a green raisin. Verley Greer kept a string of them on the porch beam every winter, and Foxfire interviewers found the same string in nearly every old kitchen they walked into through the 70s. For 1 bowl, a half cup of dried beans yields a full single supper. The technique itself is what is forgotten, not the bean. Number 22. Pinto beans simmered all afternoon. This is the dinner that runs the rest of the list, because the pot sits at the back of the stove from 1 in the afternoon until 5 and asks for almost nothing. A cup of dry pintos soaked since the night before, cold water just over the top of the beans, a piece of streaked side meat about the length of a thumb, a quartered onion, no salt at the start, because salt at the start keeps the bean skin tight, and a tight skin will not let the broth in. The pot goes on the stove with the burner turned so low that 1 bubble breaks the surface every 10 seconds. That is the rate, and it does not change for 3 hours. The kitchen begins to smell of pork and onion at the 2nd hour, and by the 3rd, the broth has turned the color of strong tea. Salt goes in only at the end, and a slosh of vinegar goes in with it. The beans come off the heat and rest in their own broth for 15 minutes before the first spoonful, because the bean keeps cooking on the way to the bowl. A half cup of dry pintos makes 2 suppers for 1 person. The leftover beans the next day are better than the first, and the broth is what most people overlook, because the broth is where the whole pot put itself. A wedge of cornbread crumbled and turns the bowl into a meal that no restaurant in any city has ever quite produced. A senior in Hancock County, Tennessee, who has been doing this since 1956, will say that the pot teaches patience to the person who tends it, and that patience is the missing ingredient in modern cooking. The dish is one of the cheapest in the American repertoire, and at the same time, it is the most filling. That is the trick the cookbooks never quite captured, because the trick is the time. Number 21. Cathead biscuit with sorghum. A biscuit the size of a cat's head, made from self-rising flour, lard, and buttermilk, baked at 450 until the top is the color of a deer hide. Split it open while it is still hot enough to burn a thumb. A spoon of dark sorghum molasses goes inside, and the molasses melts into the crumb and runs down a finger. Loyal Jones wrote that in the southern mountains, the cathead biscuit with sorghum was supper for any man or woman alone in the house, and Joseph Dabney recorded the same dish across the smokehouse counties of East Tennessee. The recipe makes 4 biscuits at a time, 3 for now, 1 for breakfast. A jar of dark Tennessee sorghum lasts a single person an entire winter. The sweetness is mineral and almost bitter at the back of the tongue, nothing like store syrup, and a single biscuit fills the plate without crowding it. Number 20. Brown beans with a slice of raw onion. The same pinto pot as number 22, but cooked plainer and served with a thick slice of white onion laid right on top of the beans. A small piece of cornbread on the side. Hill country families in McMinn County ate this 2 nights a week from October to April. The onion sweats into the broth and turns the whole bowl into something sharper than its parts. For one person, a coffee mug of beans and 1 slice of onion is a meal that a working hand could finish standing up. The leftover broth goes into a thermos for the next day's lunch, and nothing in the pot ever ends up in the chicken bucket. The dish is what a hill widow eats on the days when nothing else needs doing. Number 19. Fatback and pintos. A square of cured fatback about 2 inches across, rendered in a small, heavy skillet until it gives up its grease and turns into a brown crackling. The cracklings go on top of a bowl of plain pintos. The rendered grease goes into the bean jar for next week. Nothing wasted. The dish takes 10 minutes, and a single supper costs about 40 cents. A widow in Greene County, Tennessee, can finish the whole bowl with 1 biscuit on the side and call the kitchen closed for the night. The cracklings on top are what most of the family will reach for first. Number 18 is chicken and dumplings from a single hen. A whole stewing hen poached in salted water with a celery rib and an onion until the meat falls off the bone. Strip the bird, roll out flat dumplings the thickness of a nickel, cut them into squares with a butter knife, and drop them into the broth one at a time so they cook through without sticking. 1 hen yields 4 single suppers, and the remaining dumplings freeze in pint jars for the next 2 lunches. Mountain families did not waste a bird, and the modern freezer-to-bowl version of this dish is closer to what an Appalachian widow always did than to anything in a chain restaurant. The broth itself becomes a thermos of warmth the next morning. Number 17. Ramps and scrambled eggs. Ramps are the wild leeks that come up in the holler hardwood every March, and they have a smell that lingers on a kitchen for 2 days. A half-dozen ramps chopped fine, sweated in bacon grease for 2 minutes, then 2 beaten eggs scrambled in slow until they just set. A piece of buttered toast underneath. The supper takes 4 minutes, and the ramps are free for anyone who knows where to find them. Hill families in Madison County and across the Smokies built the spring around this meal, and the annual ramp festivals in Cosby and White Top still draw families that have gathered the same patches for 4 generations. For 1 plate, a half handful of ramps is plenty, and the smell tells the neighbors what was for supper without anyone having to say. Number 16. Squirrel gravy on biscuit. A small squirrel, dressed and cut into 4 pieces, dredged in flour and pan fried in lard until the outside is the color of a roasted chestnut. The pieces come out. The brown bits in the skillet get a spoon of flour, then a cup of milk whisked in slow until the gravy thickens. The flavor is rich, almost beefy. The squirrel goes back to warm. 1 biscuit split open, the meat laid on top, the gravy poured over. Joseph Dabney called this the most underrated supper in the southern mountains. For a senior in a hill kitchen, 1 squirrel is 1 supper, and the leftover gravy is breakfast on a piece of toast. Real quick before we keep going. A lot of you have asked where to find the full single-serving versions of these dishes, with the scaled-down measurements and the make-ahead notes. We put a small recipe guide together that walks through each one for 1 or 2 people, with the freezer notes built in. The link sits in the description. If a recipe guide that respects the way you actually cook now is the kind of thing that would help, take a look. Back to the list. Number 15. Salt pork gravy on hoe cake. A small piece of cured salt pork rendered in a skillet. The crackling set aside, the grease left in the pan. A spoon of flour stirred in, a half cup of water added slowly, salt, and a turn of black pepper. The gravy is gray and savory, and the cracklings go back in at the end as little brown chips on top. A hoe cake from number 24 sits underneath. The dish has fed Appalachian households since the 1800s, and for one person at a single chair, the whole supper takes 12 minutes and uses one pan. The salt pork itself keeps in a cool pantry for 2 months. Number 14. Greasy beans put up in summer. The greasy bean is an heirloom variety the mountains have kept alive for almost 2 centuries, with a smooth skin that looks oiled when the bean is ripe. Canned in pint jars in July and August, a single jar is exactly 1 supper for 1 person. Poured into a small pot, warmed through with a piece of side meat and a chopped onion, salted at the end. The flavor is denser than a green bean and softer than a butter bean. Ronnie Lundy gave the greasy bean a chapter in her cookbook, and the bean has come back into circulation since the 1990s through seed savers in East Tennessee and Western North Carolina. Number 13. Streak of lean with biscuit. Streak of lean is the long strip of side meat that runs along the belly of a hog, alternating pure fat and pure lean in clean bands. A 2-inch piece sliced thin, fried until the lean is brown and the fat is translucent, plated on a hot biscuit with the rendered grease drizzled over the crumb. A spoon of homemade apple butter goes on the second half of the biscuit. The 2 halves together are supper. Hill Country smokehouses kept a slab of streak of lean year-round, and a senior eating alone can buy a small piece from a country butcher for $1.50. The dish is plain, salty, sweet, and finished in 8 minutes flat. Number 12. Wilted dandelion greens with vinegar. Young dandelion leaves picked from a clean yard in March, washed twice, dressed with hot bacon grease and a splash of cider vinegar. A boiled egg sliced over the top. The greens go soft and dark, and the egg gives the plate a little body. The supper costs almost nothing if the yard is the source. Cradis Williams remembered his mother making this for herself on Sunday afternoons when the rest of the family was out, and Afrolachian families across the southern coal fields ate the same dish with the same dressing. For one person, the bowl is a full plate. Number 11. Pickled corn over white rice. Pickled corn is fresh sweet corn cut from the cob, packed in a stone crock with salt brine, and left to ferment for 2 weeks until the kernels turn the color of straw. The taste is sour and bright, somewhere between sauerkraut and pickled okra. A 1/4 cup of pickled corn, warmed in a small pan with butter, spooned over a half cup of cooked rice. The supper is finished in 7 minutes. Afrolachian families in the Cumberland Plateau and Black Hill households across East Kentucky kept this dish in regular rotation because the crock lasted 6 months and the corn was free off the cob. The bowl reheats beautifully the next day, and the brine itself becomes the dressing for a hot potato. Number 10. Cornmeal mush with sorghum molasses. A half cup of yellow cornmeal whisked slow into 2 cups of boiling salted water, stirred for 10 minutes until the spoon stands up in it. Mush into a bowl, a spoon of dark sorghum poured over the top, a splash of cold whole milk around the edge. Supper is on the table in 15 minutes. A widow in Cock County could finish the bowl and call the evening done. The leftover mush gets pressed into a loaf pan overnight, sliced cold the next morning, and fried in bacon grease for breakfast. 2 meals from one pot, and the dish has lived in the southern mountains since the Cherokee taught the first settlers what to do with corn. Number 9. Liver mush, sliced and fried. Liver mush is a North Carolina hill country specialty made from pork liver, head meat, and cornmeal, set in a small loaf and chilled. A 1/4-inch slice fried in lard until the edges crisp brown. 2 slices on a plate with a fried egg and a biscuit. The dish has lived in the Western Carolinas for 2 centuries, sold in waxed paper at country stores from Asheville to Lenoir. Niece's and Mac's are the 2 old hill country brands that still wrap the loaf the same way they did in the 1950s. For a senior at a kitchen table, 1 small loaf yields 6 single suppers, and the whole loaf costs about $4. Number 8. Cushaw squash baked in one piece. Cushaw is the big crookneck squash that hill families grew on the back fence, with skin the color of a peeled birch and striped in pale green. A small wedge cut from the squash, seeded, brushed with butter and a sprinkle of brown sugar, baked in a covered dish at 350 until the flesh gives at the point of a knife. The wedge goes on a plate with a piece of leftover ham. The flavor is sweeter than pumpkin and milder than butternut, and the dish keeps a single person fed through October and November. Loyal Jones documented the Cushaw across the southern mountains and called it the workhorse of the late garden. The wedge reheats well 3 days in a row. Number 7 on this list is poke salad with a scrambled egg. Poke salad is the young shoot of the pokeweed plant, gathered in April when the leaves are still tender and pale. Boiled twice in 2 changes of water to draw the bitterness out, then drained and chopped. A spoon of bacon grease in a hot skillet, the greens scrambled in with 1 beaten egg, salt at the end. The dish is famous across the Smokies and the Blue Ridge, and the song from the 1960s only put a name to what every hill family already ate every spring. For a single supper, a handful of cooked greens and 1 egg is plenty. The plate costs nothing if the poke is in the yard, and the dish is one of the last surviving wild food traditions in American eating. Number 6. Fried green tomatoes on a single plate. 3 thick slices of green tomato dredged in cornmeal, fried in bacon grease until the cornmeal coating turns the color of pine bark. Salt and pepper at the end. A spoon of buttermilk dressing on the side if it is in the icebox. Hill households all across the southern mountains ate fried green tomatoes from the first frost warning in September straight through October, because every gardener has a vine full of green ones the morning before the first hard freeze. For 1 plate, 3 slices fit the saucer, and the supper is on the table in 9 minutes. Number 5. Boiled cabbage with hog jowl. A quarter head of cabbage cut into wedges, dropped into a pot with a small piece of smoked hog jowl, covered with water, salted, simmered for 40 minutes until the cabbage is soft and the broth tastes of pork. The wedge goes on a plate, the jowl alongside in a thumb-sized slice, the broth in a coffee mug. 3 single plates from 1 small head of cabbage. Sidney Saylor Farr wrote that the dish was the cheapest reliable supper in the mountains and that the broth itself was the part most cooks underused. For a senior eating alone, the whole meal costs about $1 and warms a kitchen for the entire afternoon. Number 4. Souse with saltine crackers. Souse is the jellied loaf made from a pork head cooked down with vinegar, sage, and crushed red pepper, set in a small pan and chilled until firm. A 1/4-inch slice on a saucer next to 6 saltines and a few rings of raw white onion. The flavor is bright, sour, and savory. The dish has fed the mountains since the days when nothing of a butchered hog was thrown out, and a small loaf from a country butcher costs about $3 and yields 8 single suppers. A widow in Madison County will tell you the slice is what she eats most often when the stove is not worth lighting. Number 3. Buttermilk and cornbread supper. A wedge of cornbread broken into a tall glass of cold buttermilk, eaten with a long spoon at the kitchen table. This is the same idea as number 29, but earned its own number because the elders insisted it was a full supper, not a snack. The dish sustained mountain families through summer fevers, hot August evenings, and any night the stove never came on. A senior in the Smokies can finish the glass in 8 minutes, and the whole supper costs less than 30 cents. The taste is what hill grandmothers reached for on the days they could not face a hot stove. Number 2. Apple hash with bacon. 2 strips of bacon chopped and rendered in a small skillet until the grease pools. 1 firm tart apple cored and diced, dropped into the grease to soften. A boiled potato from yesterday diced and added. Salt, pepper, a pinch of dried thyme if the cupboard has any. 8 minutes of stirring, and the hash is ready. A plate for 1, eaten with a spoon. The dish is the kind of cooking a hill country widow turned to when the icebox had odds and ends and the stove still needed to do something useful before bed. The flavor is sweet and salty in the same bite, and the plate empties without effort. Number 1. Onion, tomato, and cucumber stacked on cornbread. A thick wedge of yellow skillet cornbread on a plate. A slice of vine tomato laid across the top. A ring of sweet white onion. 3 thin coins of cucumber. A pinch of salt, and a splash of cider vinegar to finish. Hill households called this the summer supper because nothing was cooked except the cornbread, and the cornbread came from breakfast. The plate sets up in 2 minutes, costs almost nothing, and tastes exactly like a July evening on a wood porch with the screen door open. It is the dinner that a senior eating alone has been quietly making in the southern mountains for as long as cornbread has come out of an iron skillet. Grilled cheese and pineapple sandwiches were one of Grandma's best-kept secrets, the kind of meal that made you raise an eyebrow right before you fell in love with it. It started like any grilled cheese with slices of bread and whatever cheese was available. But right before the second slice went on, she would place a canned pineapple ring right in the middle of the sandwich. Then it all went into the skillet with butter hissing underneath. The cheese melted, the pineapple softened, the bread crisped to a golden crunch. The end result? A sandwich that was both savory and sweet, crispy and juicy. It was like dinner and dessert in one bite, and it somehow worked better than anyone expected. She made it on Fridays, or on days when the pantry was almost bare, but the craving for something different was strong. The smell of warm pineapple and browned butter filled the house and lingered even after the dishes were done. Kids loved it. Grown-ups pretended they did not, until they asked for seconds. It was quick, clever, and full of unexpected joy. Just like her. Pineapple glazed ham steak with minted peas. Sounds fancy now, but it came from kitchens trying to make dinner fast and special. A thick slice of ham, cut from a round or canned variety, was seared in a skillet, then brushed with a glaze of pineapple juice, brown sugar, and mustard. As it sizzled, the glaze caramelized and formed a golden crust. Minted peas were the quick side, just frozen or fresh peas warmed with butter and a few mint leaves. It was fast and used shelf-stable and frozen ingredients, but it looked thoughtful. Cookbooks from the 1950s and 1960s praised it for its balance and bright flavor. The pineapple made it sweet. The mustard gave it a kick. The peas kept it fresh. You could make this in 20 minutes and still feel proud. On a summer night when the house felt too still, something warm and sweet like this hit the spot. Wilted lettuce with hot bacon dressing transformed garden greens into something entirely different from cold salad. Grandma would fry thick-cut bacon until crispy, then remove it and pour a splash of cider vinegar into the sizzling hot grease. The mixture would pop and sputter dangerously, filling the kitchen with sharp, smoky fragrance. She added a pinch of sugar by feel, stirred quickly, then poured the hot dressing over a bowl of tender leaf lettuce just picked from the garden. The leaves wilted immediately, becoming silky and infused with bacon flavor while still retaining some fresh crunch. The crumbled bacon was scattered on top, sometimes with sliced hard-boiled eggs. This dish existed only in spring when lettuce was young and tender, before summer heat turned it bitter. Grandma made it entirely by instinct. How much vinegar depended on how tart she wanted it, how much sugar on the lettuce's bitterness that day. The salad was eaten immediately, while still warm, a fleeting pleasure that couldn't be saved. Tomato gravy started the same way sawmill gravy did. Bacon drippings in a hot skillet, a spoonful of flour stirred in. But where sawmill gravy reached for milk, tomato gravy reached for the canning jar. Home-canned tomatoes, crushed by hand into the roux, turned the gravy a deep orange red and gave it a sweetness that the pepper-heavy sawmill version never had. A pinch of sugar went in if the tomatoes were too sharp, and the gravy cooked down until it was thick enough to sit on a split biscuit without running off the edges. Across the rural South through the 1940s and 50s, tomato gravy was breakfast, served alongside whatever the kitchen could produce: eggs if the hens were laying, a slice of cured ham if the smokehouse still had one. The color told you what kind of morning it was. Pale gravy meant milk was plentiful. Red gravy meant the cow had gone dry and the tomatoes were filling in. Ham and applesauce might sound fancy today, but back in the day it was just something Grandma could throw together before the table was even set. Sliced ham went straight into a hot skillet, sometimes with just a dab of butter or the leftover fat from breakfast. A quick sear on each side was all it needed. Meanwhile, the applesauce, homemade if you had a backyard tree, canned if you were in a hurry, was warming on the back burner. This was dinner you could smell from the front porch. The saltiness of the ham played off the soft, tart sweetness of the apples in a way that felt balanced, simple, and oddly comforting. It was a meal for days when you were tired, when groceries were thin, or when you just needed something that felt familiar. And the best part? No oven. No long wait. Just a skillet, a spoon, and a little heat. Folks might not talk about ham and applesauce as a main course anymore, but for a generation raised on wartime thrift and flavor that did not waste time, this was a weeknight miracle. If you ever needed proof that sweet and salty go hand in hand, here it is. Cold salmon loaf with cucumber sauce looked like something from a buffet table but was made with canned fish and scraps. You flaked the salmon, canned if fresh was too much, then mixed it with breadcrumbs, eggs, lemon juice, and seasoning before shaping it into a loaf and baking. Once cooled, it was sliced and served cold, usually with a cucumber sauce made from sour cream or mayo and finely chopped cucumber. This dish showed up often in the 1950s and 1960s cookbooks, especially in regions where summer meant heat and no one wanted the stove on. Cold dinners were in. Molded ones were even better. You could make it early, chill it, and slice it up at dinner time without breaking a sweat. It was elegant in its own quiet way. Some added celery or pickles, others kept it smooth. Either way, it answered the question of what to eat when the heat made everything else unbearable. Soup, beans, and cornbread was the Monday dinner that anchored countless rural weeks across Appalachia and the South. Grandma soaked dried pinto beans overnight, then simmered them all day with a ham bone saved from Sunday's dinner, letting the marrow and meat scraps infuse the broth with smoky richness. She added nothing but salt, pepper, and maybe an onion quartered and thrown in whole. The beans cooked until creamy, their liquid thickening into rich pot liquor prized as much as the beans themselves. Meanwhile, cornbread baked in a preheated cast iron skillet, its bottom forming a golden crust from the hot bacon grease coating the pan. The combination provided complete protein, stretching a single ham bone into meals for 8 or more. Grandma never timed anything. She knew the beans were done by their appearance, the cornbread ready by its smell. This meal required only patience and the accumulated wisdom of generations who survived on exactly this. Sawmill gravy got its name in the lumber camps of the late 1800s, where cooks fed crews of men using nothing but flour, grease, milk, and black pepper in quantities large enough to fill a washtub. The gravy was thick, pale, peppery, and poured over anything that held still: biscuits, toast, cornbread, fried potatoes. You started with a few spoonfuls of bacon drippings in a hot skillet, stirred in flour until it turned golden and smelled like toasted grain, then poured in milk slowly while scraping the bottom of the pan. The whole process took less than 10 minutes and fed a household for pennies. Some cooks called it bulldog gravy, and in the coal camps of eastern Kentucky and West Virginia, it showed up at every meal: breakfast, dinner, and supper. Because the mines paid low and the company store charged high. The pepper had to bite. If you couldn't feel the pepper, the gravy wasn't finished. She made it by sound. The sizzle of flour hitting grease told her everything a recipe never could. Salmon patties with saltine crumbs were a classic end-of-the-week dinner, the kind of meal you made when the fridge looked sad and the meat was long gone. Canned salmon was a miracle in itself, cheap, shelf-stable, and packed with enough protein to make you feel like you had not missed a step. Grandma would mix it up with crushed saltine crackers, a beaten egg, and maybe a sprinkle of onion or celery if there was any left. She would form them into small patties and fry them in the same pan that had seen 5 meals already. The result? Golden, crispy outsides with soft, savory centers. They had just enough flavor to make you forget they came from a can and not the sea. Served with peas or creamed corn, or just a dollop of mayonnaise on the side, it was the kind of humble meal that never needed applause. It showed up quietly, did its job, and vanished without complaint. but it left everyone full and just a little more hopeful. That is what dinner was supposed to do. Not impressed, not sparkle, just comfort. And that is exactly what these little salmon cakes delivered. Corn fritter suppers were one of those magical meals that felt light but filled you up fast. Made from fresh corn cut off the cob, mixed with flour, eggs, and a splash of milk, these fritters were dropped into hot oil until golden brown and crisp. You would pile them high on a plate, sometimes dusted with salt or drizzled with syrup if the mood called for it. But the real trick was what came on the side. Thick tomato slices, chilled and sprinkled with pepper, or a scoop of cottage cheese gave the meal its balance. This was not a starter. This was dinner. A hot, crunchy, fresh off the skillet kind of dinner that made the house smell like summer. Cookbooks from the 1940s to the 1970s were packed with corn fritter recipes, each with its own little spin. Some added chives, some tossed in bits of bacon or green pepper. But they all revolved around one thing: making corn the star. If you had a garden or access to a roadside farm stand, corn fritters were an obvious choice. They were fast, easy, and cheap, and they made everyone at the table feel like they were eating something special. Cornmeal mush and molasses was the breakfast that cost almost nothing but provided everything a body needed to face hard work. Grandma would boil water in a heavy pot, then slowly stream coarse cornmeal into the bubbling liquid while stirring constantly with a wooden spoon worn smooth from decades of use. The mixture had to cook slowly, requiring patience to prevent lumps or scorching. When it reached the right thickness, something only her hands knew, she spooned it steaming into bowls and drizzled thick blackstrap molasses over the top. The combination of corn's earthiness and molasses' mineral-rich sweetness created something that tasted like sustenance itself. Children ate it before school. Men ate it before dawn chores. The leftover mush was poured into loaf pans, chilled until firm, sliced, and fried in bacon grease for supper. Nothing was wasted. The dish demanded no recipe because the proportions lived in muscle memory, passed from grandmother to mother to daughter through watching, not reading. There was a time when the last meal of the day cost nothing but a fistful of cold cornbread and whatever buttermilk was left in the jar. Cornbread crumbled into buttermilk, eaten from a glass with a long spoon, was supper for families across Appalachia, the Ozarks, and the rural Deep South from the Depression years straight through the 1970s. The cornbread had to be cold, at least a few hours old, firm enough to hold its shape when the buttermilk hit it. You crumbled it by hand, poured the buttermilk over, and ate it standing at the counter or sitting on the porch in the dark. A full glass cost less than 3 cents in the 1940s. It required no stove, no heat, no preparation beyond the breaking of bread. The people who ate this every night did not call it a recipe. They called it Tuesday. The jar of bacon grease beside the stove was the most important ingredient in the kitchen, and nobody who grew up in these houses ever threw it away. Bologna and egg scramble was the go-to dinner when breakfast never quite happened and lunch was already a blur. It started with slices of bologna, thick and pink and curled at the edges, hitting the hot pan with a sizzle. Grandma would brown them until they crisped at the edges, then crack in a few eggs and give it all a quick scramble. No measuring, no garnish, just protein and grease and flavor. Sometimes she would add a little shredded cheese if she had some, but it was not necessary. This was about getting food on the table without making it a project. The bologna gave the eggs a smoky, salty edge, and the eggs softened everything just enough to go down easy. Served in bowls, over toast, or straight from the skillet, no one ever walked away hungry. It was simple, dependable, and tasted a whole lot fancier than it had any right to. You could make it in 10 minutes, clean up in 5, and be done with the day before the sun went down. Some meals were special because they were rare. This one was special because it was always there. Mock chicken legs, better known as city chicken, were a Depression-era idea that stuck around. You took cubes of pork or veal, skewered them, rolled them in flour, egg, and breadcrumbs, then fried or baked them until golden. The idea was to mimic fried chicken legs when chicken cost too much. And you know what? It worked. Cookbooks from the 1940s through the 1970s printed this recipe again and again. In summer, these skewers were served with slaw or cucumbers, something cool to balance the heat. You could reheat them or pack them for a picnic. A pound or two of meat could feed a full family. For families in cities where meat came from the butcher, not a backyard coop, this recipe was gold. It looked like a feast, even if it was scraps. Today, you hardly see city chicken, but people who remember it still say it tasted better than the real thing. Cracklin' bread was cornbread elevated by the precious remnants of hog butchering when nothing from the animal went to waste. After rendering lard from pork fat, Grandma saved the crispy brown bits left behind, cracklings that tasted like concentrated pork flavor. She stirred them directly into cornbread batter made from cornmeal, buttermilk, and a little lard, creating something richer than plain cornbread could ever be. The cracklings softened slightly during baking, but kept enough chew to provide texture in every bite. Grandma knew exactly how many cracklings to add without measuring, adjusting for how much fat remained on them. This bread appeared only after hog killing, usually in late fall, making it a seasonal treasure that families anticipated all year. The technique required understanding pork fat, knowing when cracklings were ready, and trusting your eyes over any written measurement. It was knowledge that lived in doing, not reading, and it made ordinary cornbread extraordinary. But before anything could be stretched or seasoned, someone had to know what was safe to eat from the ground, and poke salad was the test that separated mountain cooks from everyone else. Phytolacca americana, pokeweed, grew wild along fence rows and ditch banks across the Appalachian South, and in early spring the young shoots were one of the first greens available to families who had eaten nothing fresh since autumn. The plant was toxic if handled wrong. You boiled the leaves 3 separate times, draining and replacing the water each round to pull the poison out before the greens were safe to eat. After the 3rd boil, you fried them in bacon grease with salt, and they turned dark, tender, and rich, tasting like a cross between spinach and asparagus. Cherokee and rural Appalachian families had been preparing poke this way for generations, and the knowledge passed by standing at the stove, not from any book. One wrong step, skipping a boil, picking leaves too mature, and the dish could make you sick. You either knew how or you didn't touch it. This was not just a baked bean and hot dog dinner. This was the working family's answer to hunger, chaos, and a kitchen clock that never slowed down. Grandma would take a can of baked beans, thick, sweet, and molasses dark, and heat it slowly on the stove. Then came the franks, sliced into coins and tossed in until they plumped up like little balloons. Sometimes she would add a spoonful of brown sugar or a shake of mustard, but most nights she just stirred and served. It was hot, sticky, smoky, and completely effortless. The beans coated the franks like syrup over pancakes, and it went best with a buttered slice of toast or a side of cornbread if the oven was already warm. Kids would gobble it down in minutes. Grown-ups would sigh, eat quietly, and go back for seconds. It was the kind of stovetop magic that made do with what you had and somehow made it taste better than it should. You never forgot the smell. And even if you rolled your eyes when she made it, you would ask for it again once life got harder and you needed something easy. That is what made it a keeper. This one might raise some eyebrows today, but back in the day, pork chops with rhubarb compote were about as close to gourmet as summer dinners got. You would sear the chops in a cast iron skillet, brown them up good, and then serve them with a sauce made from stewed rhubarb, vinegar, and a little sugar if you had any to spare. The result? Sweet, tangy, juicy, and warm. Rhubarb was a big deal back then, especially in areas where the plant grew wild or right in someone's backyard. If you had a patch, you had dinner. This recipe showed up in a lot of cookbooks because it was reliable. Even tough cuts of meat got elevated with enough rhubarb sauce on top. It was common to serve it with a scoop of mashed potatoes or white bread to soak up the juices. Not everyone liked the sharp bite of rhubarb, especially kids, but the grown-ups appreciated its practicality. It kept well, cooked fast, and paired perfectly with pork. Some versions added cloves or nutmeg. Others threw in onions or swapped the rhubarb for stewed apples when the season passed. Either way, this dish captured the feeling of summer dinners cooked low and slow with whatever you had on hand. The tomato had to be warm from the garden, not the refrigerator, never the store, and sliced thick enough that the juice ran down your wrist when you bit into the sandwich. 2 slices of soft white bread, a heavy spread of mayonnaise, thick rounds of a tomato still holding the heat of the afternoon sun, and enough salt to make the flavor crack open. This was lunch and sometimes supper across the entire American South, a meal so simple that writing it down felt insulting to the people who made it. Hellmann's, first mass-distributed in the 1920s, became the only acceptable brand. Using anything else was grounds for a kitchen argument that could last a whole summer. The sandwich existed only during tomato season. When the last vine died in September, it vanished, and no winter tomato from a grocery store could bring it back. There were 2 things nearly every kitchen had back then: creamed corn and hot dogs. When both of them landed in the same skillet, dinner was practically done. This was the kind of meal Grandma made when time was short and kids were restless. She would slice the hot dogs into little coins and toss them into a buttered pan until they browned just right around the edges. Then came the creamed corn, thick, sweet, and silky from the can. It all got mixed together into a bubbling, golden mess that looked questionable to some but tasted like warm security. You could eat it on its own, spoon it over bread, or mop it up with the last slice of toast from breakfast. Nobody called it gourmet, but everyone called it dinner. It filled your belly, cleaned out the pantry, and gave you one less thing to worry about. And somehow, it was the meal that lingered in memory more than any roast or fancy casserole. Maybe it was the smell. Maybe it was how fast it came together. Or maybe it was just that it tasted better when you were young, hungry, and too impatient to wait for something fancier. Ham and banana casserole is one of those recipes that makes you stop and read the page twice. But once upon a time, this odd couple was a regular guest at summer dinners across suburban America. It started with slices of ham wrapped around whole bananas, arranged in a casserole dish and baked with mustard sauce poured over the top. The mustard added a tangy kick, and the bananas softened into the kind of texture that people back then thought of as fancy. Some even added shredded cheddar cheese. It was quirky, no doubt about it. But in the 1950s and 1960s, cookbooks were full of strange pairings that somehow worked. This dish was a crowd pleaser for its novelty as much as its taste. And in hot weather, it was easy to make without much fuss. It showed up at church potlucks, birthday parties, and even weeknight dinners when the fridge was running low. Today, people may cringe at the combo, but for families back then, it was just another way to stretch meat and fruit into a full meal. It is the kind of thing you might laugh at now, but remember fondly if you grew up scraping mustard sauce off your plate. Leather breeches and fatback was a winter survival dish that turned summer's green bean abundance into cold weather sustenance. Grandma would string fresh green beans on heavy thread during peak harvest, creating long garlands that hung from kitchen rafters to dry for weeks. By winter, these shriveled brown strips rattled like old leather when touched, giving them their peculiar name. To prepare them, she soaked handfuls overnight, then simmered them for hours with salted fatback that slowly melted its richness into the pot. The beans softened into something entirely different from fresh ones, chewy, concentrated, with a deep, earthy flavor that no canned vegetable could match. This dish required no measuring, just the knowledge of how much water to add and when the beans had reached the right tenderness. Families relied on leather breeches when snow-covered gardens, and fresh vegetables existed only in memory. It was peasant food that tasted like Providence, requiring only patience and the accumulated wisdom of generations. American goulash light was less of a recipe and more of a formula: meat, pasta, and tomatoes in whatever shape you could get. Elbow macaroni was the go-to because it cooked fast and filled up the pot. Grandma would brown a little ground beef, drain off the grease, and toss it with stewed tomatoes straight from the can. No sauce, no simmering, no drama. Sometimes she added a bit of onion or garlic salt, but usually it was just whatever she had on hand. The pasta would soak up the tomato juice until it was soft and tangy, and the beef added just enough flavor to make it stick to your ribs. Served in bowls with a sprinkle of grated cheese, if you were lucky, it was dinner. Fast. It was not the baked casserole version you see in magazines. This was goulash stripped down to its bones, made for people who needed food on the table in 10 minutes or less. And the best part? It was good. Really good. No breadcrumbs, no baking dish, no long prep. Just one skillet, one spoon, and a whole lot of knowing what mattered. That is how Grandma cooked. Stuffed tomato platters with egg salad filling were the summer version of keeping it simple without losing the charm. You would start with the ripest tomatoes you could find, usually picked right from the garden or bought cheap from a neighbor's stand. Slice them in half, scoop out a bit of the center, and fill them with homemade egg salad. Not the store-bought kind either. This egg salad was chopped eggs, mustard, a bit of mayonnaise, and maybe a sprinkle of paprika or chopped pickle for punch. Then the filled tomatoes would be plated on a bed of lettuce, often with saltines on the side, and a tall glass of iced tea. This was not a lazy meal. It was intentional, refreshing, and bright. The kind of plate that made you feel taken care of even when money was tight and the kitchen was sweltering. These showed up at bridge club meetings, baby showers, and Sunday dinners when nobody felt like cooking. The tomatoes cooled the egg salad. The lettuce gave it a little crunch. And if you were lucky, someone would have tossed in some sweet relish just right. The whole thing was cold, clean, and deeply satisfying. A real taste of summer simplicity. Chicken and slick dumplings was Sunday dinner comfort that required no recipe, only patience and hands that knew dough. Grandma would simmer a whole chicken for hours until the meat fell from the bones, creating rich golden broth that filled the kitchen with promise. She pulled the meat into shreds and returned it to the pot while mixing dumpling dough from flour, chicken fat, salt, and just enough broth to hold together. Rolled thin on a floured board and cut into strips, these slick dumplings went into the bubbling pot where they cooked into silky ribbons that soaked up chicken flavor. The result was neither soup nor stew, but something in between. Thick, hearty, and deeply satisfying. Every grandmother's dumplings tasted different because every grandmother's hands worked differently, rolling thicker or thinner. This was cold weather food, sick day food, company's coming food. The technique passed through watching, through standing beside Grandma at the counter, through years of practice. Peanut butter and bacon sounds like a dare today, but to Grandma, it was just Tuesday lunch. This was a sandwich born in the tail end of the Great Depression and carried proudly into the next decade by people who knew how to stretch every ingredient. She would fry up strips of bacon until they crackled, drain them on the same paper towel she used all week, then lay them across a thick spread of peanut butter on white sandwich bread. That was it. No lettuce, no tomato, no fancy mayonnaise. Just salt, fat, protein, and speed. Kids loved the crunch. Grown-ups loved how it filled you up without burning through the grocery budget. And for something so strange-sounding, it just worked. The warmth of the bacon softened the peanut butter slightly, and the two came together like old friends who had nothing in common but always got along. Sometimes she would add a second slice of bread, but often it was open-faced and served cold. It was portable, practical, and surprisingly satisfying. And in homes where time was short and mouths were many, that counted for everything. You might laugh at it now, but one bite would probably bring it all back. Canned peach and cottage cheese ring mold was the cold supper your grandmother swore by, and for good reason. Molded in a ring pan, it started with plain gelatin, mixed with the syrup from canned peaches, folded together with cottage cheese, diced peaches, and sometimes crushed pineapple or chopped nuts. Once set, it came out as a shimmering circle of pastel fruit and cream, served cold with a dinner roll or a spoonful of mayonnaise on the side. That might sound strange now, but this was a meal built for heat. It did not require an oven. It could be made the night before, and it was filling in that oddly satisfying way that old-fashioned suppers tend to be. This recipe showed up constantly in homemaker magazines and fundraising cookbooks during the 1950s through the 1970s. It was meant to be practical and pretty. You could make it with what you had in your pantry, and it made use of canned goods in a way that felt fresh. People served it at luncheons, baby showers, or just on nights when nobody wanted to cook. It was elegant on a dime, a little weird by today's standards, and a real piece of summer dinner history. Poke salad with eggs was the dangerous spring tonic that required knowledge passed only through careful teaching. Pokeweed grew wild along fence rows, its young shoots emerging as the first spring greens when bodies starved for fresh vitamins after winter. But poke was poisonous if prepared wrong. Grandma knew to pick only the youngest shoots, boil them in at least 2 changes of water to remove toxins, then drain and fry them in bacon grease. She scrambled eggs directly into the cooked greens, the yolks enriching what would otherwise be bitter and medicinal. No cookbook ever included proper poke preparation because the knowledge was too dangerous for inexperienced readers. You had to learn which plants were young enough, how many water changes were truly necessary, when the greens were safe. This dish represented the ultimate grandmother knowledge, survival wisdom that could feed you or kill you depending on expertise that existed only in the hands of those who learned it young. Dumped creamed peas on buttered toast was one of those meals that whispered instead of shouted. It never tried to impress anyone. It was made for quiet nights, empty fridges, and long weeks. Grandma would melt a little butter in a pan, add canned peas, sometimes drained, sometimes not, and stir in milk and a bit of flour or cornstarch to thicken it. Salt, pepper, maybe a dash of sugar if the peas were too sharp. Then she would ladle the warm, creamy mix over thick slices of buttered toast. It was soft, it was mild, it was the edible version of a warm blanket. Nobody bragged about it, and no one ever asked for seconds out loud. But the plate was always clean by the end. It was a meal that held your hand, quietly filled you up, and gave you the strength to keep going. In some homes, it was the only hot food all week. And even if you had fancier ingredients or a longer grocery list, you still came back to this because it made you feel like a kid again. Just peas and bread and time. That was more than enough. Sliced tomato pie with biscuit crust was a midsummer miracle born from the garden and the oven. Tomatoes were the star. Big, juicy ones sliced thick and layered over a buttery biscuit dough pressed into a pie pan. Between the layers went onion, herbs, and sometimes cheddar or dollops of mayo, depending on the cookbook. Once baked, the tomatoes softened and sweetened, and the crust puffed up around the edges. The result was messy, fragrant, and comforting. This pie was not dessert, and it was not just a side, it was dinner. Served warm or room temperature, it filled the house with the smell of summer. Families used it to deal with too many tomatoes and a desire to skip meat. It was practical and indulgent. You could throw in corn or breadcrumbs. Some added a top crust, but most kept it open-faced. It faded when people stopped baking from scratch. But those who remember it will tell you it was magic. Fried potatoes and onions was the side dish that accompanied nearly everything and could become a meal when times got lean. Grandma sliced potatoes thin, not uniform like a machine, but varied by her practiced hand, along with sweet yellow onions cut into rings. Everything went into a cast-iron skillet with enough bacon grease to coat the bottom generously. She let them cook undisturbed until the bottom layer crisped, then stirred and pressed them down again, building layers of crispy and soft. The onions caramelized into sweet golden tangles, while the potatoes developed brown edges and creamy centers. No recipe existed because none was needed. Every country cook knew this technique by feel, adjusting heat by watching, seasoning by tasting. During lean times, this dish with cornbread became dinner. During harvest, it sat beside fried chicken and fresh vegetables. Either way, it tasted like home, like the kind of cooking that sustained families for generations without a single written instruction. This one came straight out of the open the pantry and hope for a miracle school of cooking. Scrambled eggs with canned chili was never in any cookbook, but it made it onto plates across America faster than most 5-ingredient dinners. Grandma would beat a few eggs with whatever milk she had left, toss them in a skillet, and stir them just until they were barely set. Then came the chili, straight from the can, full of beans and spice and a little bit of mystery meat. It would warm right on top of the eggs until the kitchen smelled like a diner on a slow afternoon. A few slices of toast on the side, maybe a wedge of cheese if you were lucky, and you had yourself a meal. It was hearty, messy, and completely satisfying. No one asked what brand the chili was or whether the eggs were farm fresh. What mattered was that it was hot, filling, and on the table in 10 minutes. It was meals like this that made it possible to get through the rest of the week. And once you have eaten it once, you will understand why it never needed a recipe. Baked stuffed zucchini boats were the garden's way of saying dinner was ready. If you had zucchini growing out back, and most families did, you eventually ended up with more than you could use. That is where this recipe came in. You sliced the zucchini, scooped out the center, and stuffed it with breadcrumbs, sausage, herbs, onions, and a little cheese if you had it. Then it went into the oven until golden on top and tender underneath. The result was warm, filling, and surprisingly hearty for a dish with no meat front and center. This was not just about using produce, it was a centerpiece. In the 1960s and 1970s, garden cookbooks practically demanded this dish. It was meat-stretching, kid-pleasing, and oven-friendly. You could eat it warm or cold, toss in a tomato slice or two, and it became a full summer supper. Today it might pass as vegetarian rustic. Back then, it was just smart cooking. Dumplings and wild greens was the spring celebration meal when foraged foods meant fresh nutrition after months of preserved vegetables. Grandma would gather whatever was ready: dandelion greens, lamb's quarters, wild mustard, washing them thoroughly in multiple water changes. The greens simmered with salt pork until tender, their pot liquor becoming rich and slightly bitter. Meanwhile, she mixed dumpling dough by feel: flour, a bit of lard, enough liquid to hold together, then dropped spoonfuls directly into the bubbling greens. The dumplings puffed and cooked through, absorbing the flavors of greens and pork. This dish required knowing which wild plants were edible when they were tender enough to eat, and how to cook dumplings that were light rather than leaden. No measurements existed because the greens varied every gathering, and Grandma's hands knew what her eyes confirmed. It tasted like the earth waking up, like survival, like spring itself served in a bowl. Sloppy Joes had already earned their place in the American kitchen by the time Grandma figured out how to make them faster. Instead of hamburger buns, she grabbed slices of toast, whatever white sandwich bread was left in the bread box. Ground beef got tossed into the skillet with a little onion, then drowned in a quick mix of ketchup, mustard, and a pinch of sugar if you had it. No special seasonings, no packets, no fuss. Once the mixture was bubbling, it got spooned right over the toast and served just like that, open-faced, hot, and ready to fall apart in your hands. That was half the fun. It dripped, it stained your fingers, and it always tasted better the messier it was. This was a dinner for families who were too tired to sit proper but still wanted to eat together. It was loud, quick, and honest. And even though it came from a time of tight belts and short patience, it tasted like something you might pay good money for at a diner today. That is the thing about Sloppy Joe toast. It always fed more than just your stomach. Cold macaroni ring with tuna and peas was one of those make-ahead meals that looked like a party but tasted like pantry staples. It started with elbow macaroni, cooked and cooled, then tossed with mayonnaise, canned tuna, peas, chopped celery, and a touch of lemon juice. The whole mixture was packed into a ring mold and chilled for hours until it held its shape. Come dinner time, you flipped it out onto a plate and maybe garnished it with parsley or extra peas. This was dinner, not a side dish, and certainly not just for potlucks. It showed up in homemaker cookbooks throughout the 1950s and 1960s as a cool supper for hot days when no one wanted to turn on the stove. The peas gave it color. The tuna gave it protein. The macaroni made it stick to your ribs. You would slice it like a cake and serve it with iced tea and saltines. It was pretty in its own quiet way, and somehow it always worked. Some people added pimentos or chopped olives for flair. Others kept it plain and reliable. It is easy to laugh at a tuna ring now, but back then it was a little miracle of convenience and charm. Tomato gravy over biscuits was summer's answer to milk gravy, using the garden's overflow when fresh tomatoes hung heavy on the vine. Grandma would chop ripe tomatoes roughly, not measuring, just eyeing what the meal needed, then cook them down in bacon drippings until they broke apart into thick sauce. Sugar was added by the pinch to cut the acid, flour by the handful to thicken, salt and pepper by instinct alone. The gravy turned a beautiful sunset orange, chunky in some spots, smooth in others, depending entirely on how Grandma felt that morning. She spooned it hot over fresh buttermilk biscuits, the tomato juice soaking into the flaky layers. This dish appeared during tomato season only, when the garden produced faster than families could eat or preserve. There was no winter version, no substitute, just the brief window when homegrown tomatoes made this possible. The recipe died with the grandmothers who never wrote anything down, trusting their daughters would watch and remember. Spam and cabbage was the kind of meal that did not sound like much but got the job done, and then some. Grandma would slice the spam into thick chunks and toss it into a hot pan until the edges crisped and curled. Then came the shredded cabbage, sizzling as it hit the fat, softening in the salt, and soaking up every bit of flavor. A splash of vinegar or a pinch of sugar if she felt like balancing things out. That was it. No special tools, no hard steps. But the kitchen always smelled like something better than it should have. The cabbage turned silky. The spam, golden and caramelized. You could eat it on its own or pile it over mashed potatoes or rice if you had extra. For many, it was a depression holdover. For others, it was just what you made when payday was still a few days away. It was salty, hearty, and fast. The holy trinity of Grandma's weekday dinners. And for all the jokes people made about spam, no one left hungry. You might laugh at the idea now, but back then, this was dinner you could trust. Bologna salad sandwich plates were the quiet champions of summer dinners when the fridge was nearly empty, but you still needed something that felt like a meal. You would take bologna, thick cut or leftover slices, run it through a grinder or chop it by hand, then mix it with mayonnaise, sweet relish, and maybe some mustard if you liked a little zip. The resulting spread was scooped onto a leaf of butter lettuce, arranged on a plate with a couple of pickles, and served cold with slices of white bread or a few crackers on the side. This was not the same as a bologna sandwich you slapped together in a hurry. This was the dressed-up version, the dinner version. And for a lot of families in the 1950s and 1960s, it was enough to make the evening feel just a little more put together. Iced coffee or sweet tea on the side made it feel like a full meal. It might sound modest now, but it filled bellies and made do with what was on hand. People were proud of their spreads. Some added chopped celery. Others blended in boiled eggs or diced pickles. Every house had its twist. Now, what is the dish on this list that your own grandmother used to make for herself when the rest of the family was already in bed? Number 23, the leather breeches, is the one fewest people still know how to do. And number 22 is the pot that taught patience to anyone who tended it. If cornbread crumbled into buttermilk is supper at your kitchen table tonight, the whole tradition is still working. Subscribe if seeing these come back belongs in your week. Tell us in the comments which of the 30 you set a place for first. These are not poverty dinners. They are the practice of feeding yourself well at one chair with one plate.